Good evening. My name is Sasanka Pereira. I'm from South Asian University, and this is the first time that we are collaborating with LILA Foundation, and I'm very happy that we have started the initiative. I have a kind of a ritual obligation. The fun part will begin in a little while, the more engaged thing, and that is the ritual obligation is of course to welcome all of you on behalf of both the South Asian University and LILA Foundation. You might be those of you who are coming here for the first time might be somewhat scared when you see our building. It's not the most welcoming place, architecturally speaking. But and it is. But then once you come inside, you would see that it looks like we like, and if we have our way, we will probably end up producing a much more intriguing cultural space over the next few months. So if we have another event, Rizio, I'm sure you will be coming into a very transformed place. So I'm very thankful to see this many people today, and we have two interesting people to listen to and engage with, and I say interesting not because of what they write, but because of the way in which they do it. So we have a sociologist from Canada who writes poetry, and we have an English professor who writes fiction. And of course, none of them have to do it in that sense. They can teach English, and the other guy can teach sociology, and that will be the end of that. And that is what academic activities in this part of the world usually is. So for us, this is very interesting because as a department and as a faculty, and hopefully as a university, this is the kind of engagement we would like to create. Otherwise, we'll be like everybody else. So even whenever possible, I also dabble in poetry and in photography, and I try to teach sociology, and I don't know whether it works or not. But anyhow, and I also have the third person, Dr. Kavita Sharma, who is our president, and I'm very thankful to see the boss chairing the session, in the sense that this is also very unique, and we hope that this will also introduce, at least to our space, this sense that certain kinds of, certain sensibilities of culture is something that is needed, and it is, and I'm very happy that we are obviously given the right direction after she took over. So thank you very much. I will hand over to Rizio to explain what this series is all about, and then we'll get on with the basics. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Shashanka, and I welcome all of you once again on behalf of LILA. I must just tell you a little bit about what this forum is all about. It's called Bearing Witness. I must tell you a little bit about LILA also, so that people who are there are new faces here, so you know what we are doing, etc. LILA is, in short, we call it a cultural trust, but we function as a think tank. We also function as a transform action platform, and we also function as a conservation lab. This is how we define ourselves. I'll just tell you how this works. There are four major areas that we are interested in and engaged with. One is ideation and research. When we say ideation, it means how do you, our interest is in governance. The question is, how do you really arrive at a method of governance which will help you kind of deal with the times. It's a very fragmentary, very disturbing times. Today when we stand here, there is something haunting us. We heard of Peshawar, and this event that we are hosting is called Bearing Witness, Echoes of Silence. When we say this, in fact, the echoes of the grave silence in Peshawar are in the air. And it is in that that context that we are standing. So I tell you, when we talk about ideation, there is a need for us to come together. It's interdisciplinary ideation that we're talking about. Like Shashanka mentioned, it's no longer possible for us to live in our vertical kind of structures and think about, things very, very vertically and say that, okay, I'm a rocket scientist, I don't understand poetry. I'm a poet, I don't understand statistics. The world, in a world where communication revolution has really made us all come closer to each other. It looks like this revolution which is happening in communication is not really helping us bond, but it is making things more and more fragmentary. It's a paradox. It's an ironical kind of situation. So it is for us to come together and see how the real spirit of interdisciplinarity, interculturality, can help us bond in a better way so that there is a future of togetherness. That is what we mean by ideation, and research also is in that direction. How can our research be transformative? Our institutions really have this. We spend a lot of money, time, energy on doctoral researchers, postdoctoral researchers, which have absolutely. I also come from a university background. I left the university and founded LILA because there is absolutely no transformative content to the. I come from a humanities background. There are young people who are doing research on different authors, different things, without really any transformative content, without understanding why they are doing this particular research in this particular place, in this particular time. So there is a need to think about research, rethink research. That's what we are doing on one side. Then we also think that it's very important to bring this knowledge, space of knowledge, in touch with community and help communities develop in a very, very holistic kind of manner. And for that, conservation for us is very important, because conservation, we distinguish between conservation and preservation, because there is this, sometimes we tend to use preservation and conservation as synonymously, but they are not, because preservation puts man in the center of affairs. And then we think that because we think something is important, we must freeze it in time and preserve it. The conservation is a very natural process. We let certain things go off, let certain things die, but we also let things transform, evolve. So that is the lab that we are now. We want to develop this in so many different ways, come into different spaces, universities, learning spaces, and engage with people, bring public into university spaces, etc. This is one such forums where we are really thinking of how to bridge these gaps between elitist academic spaces and community. So people should come together in these times. That's very important for us. So we call it bearing witness, because in this kind of a situation as today, when we hear about the massacre of innocent children, these kind of things, when we are faced with this kind of situation, how can the arts, literature, to remain in its kind of safe aesthetic constructs? So we are trying to understand how the arts, the humanities, literature bears witness to the time. How do our writers bear witness to the time? So what are the ways of bearing witness? That is how this forum is conceptualized. And this particular event that we've come together for is called Echoes of Silence. Echoes of Silence because the prime mover of this event is Vikram. Vikram proposed this. He came up with this idea. And Cheran was coming at that time, so we wanted to work around the theme of violence to see how an incident of violence can create echoes which are very, very varied. Sometimes an incident of a space of violence also builds relationships. It becomes, we don't think about, normally when we talk about violence, we only talk about the negative things of violence. But sometimes, these spaces are also spaces where people bond more intensely, more creatively, more in a lasting manner. So we wanted to think about various ways in which, various echoes of this silence which powers of authority, different powers are imposing on us. So that is how this forum is conceptualized, and today's program is based around this theme. That's why it's called Echoes of Silence. And both the writers have written, very, very substantially on this theme. They've explored this theme of violence, and knowing their background. So like Cheran has come from Sri Lanka, Tamil, in exile in Canada. Vikram has been, he's also got a lot of various backgrounds, gone outside, worked with various institutions, now he's teaching, etc., etc. So how do these two different writers, coming from two different spaces, look at this theme? How do they connect with the echoes of silence? And I don't know whether you remember, I just want to evoke one more thing before I close. Exactly 10 years back, a similar incident as we are facing today, like in 2004, September 1st, to be very exact, a similar incident had happened. I don't know whether you remember this name, Beslan. There was a similar massacre happening in Beslan during the Chechnyan independent struggle, war. In a school, similar situation in a school around, that day was called Knowledge Day. So there were a lot of people, students, parents, everybody had come to the school. More than 1,000 people were held hostages in a school. And it lasted for 3 days. And at the end of the third day, when the Russian army had got in and tried to release these people, 375 people were killed, among them 172 children. It's exactly 1 decade. And we are faced with the same situation. There are 132 children who are massacred. And we are in the middle of that. How do we respond to this? How do we bear witness? So I'll just read this statement that I have written to introduce this, and then we can start this. We start with the statement begins with a quotation from William Faulkner. The past is never dead. In fact, it's not even past. The journalist engages with events as they happen. The historian deals with them in retrospect. The biographer is concerned with their principal actors. For all three, history forms, or should form, their major stock in trade. The creative writer, however, seeks to get to the heart, pulsating underneath the body of facts, to the anonymous millions who remain silent witnesses to history's distortions, to the resounding echoes that make their silence speak louder than all the shouting from the rooftops. These echoes of love, these echoes of hate, these echoes of laughter, these echoes of pain, these echoes of life, these echoes of death, these multi-layered echoes of silence that resonate long after the history of a period has been written, long after its facts have been disassembled and the actions of its principal actors argued over. Each echo is a story, an image, a drama. Each echo is a maze of contradictions, a web of deceits, a labyrinth of longing. Each echo is a voice waiting to be heard, and a heart aching to be bared, a soul yearning to be freed. With words, we seek to give each echo a shape and a form. With words, We seek to grant it a voice that it ensures it no longer remains a mere echo. With words, we seek to claim it from the fear that might suppress it, the anger that might distort it, the hatred that might want to stamp it out. With words, we seek to reclaim the echoes of the silence teeming all around us. I just remember one thing that Milan Kundera said. The struggle of man against power is the struggle of memory against forgetting. We present this event, bearing witness, echoes of silence, and we dedicate it to the memory of all the children who are no more in Peshawar, in Basra, in Delhi, Bombay, Ahmedabad, in various places across the country. We present this in memory. We present this against forgetting. Thank you. I want Kavita Sharma to take this.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Professor Cheran and Professor Vikram Kapur, and all resume and all members of LILA Foundation. Rizu is just being very modest. She was a very good teacher of English in Bombay University, and it's been an act of great courage to give it all up and to start this whole foundation. As and you heard, what are the aims of it? So, but LILA Foundation has made a name for itself, and it is well established and into so many things that are badly needed in a world which just does commerce and computers and business management and PRO and all of that. But before I proceed, I think I would like everyone to stand up for a minute of silence for so much. So I won't take up too much of your time, but I will just say that this has been an education for me, because I had not read the mainstream literature. I still have just dipped into some of the things that you have written, Professor Cheran, and I had not read your work at all. And your written novels, I read both of them. So the last 1 week has been a great education, and I can only thank both of you and Rizio for having propelled me into this education, which I hope will happen more and more. But Vikram, I think we will start with you. So you're going to do short stories.
Good evening. Can everyone hear me? At the back? Okay. First of all, thank you very much, Dr. Sharma, Rizio, and everyone for coming out tonight. It's a cold night, and thank you very much for coming out for this evening. You know, when Rizio read out that statement, when I wrote that statement, there was that one thing, one image that was in my head, and that image has come back to me over the last few days. I think it was around 2004, and I was giving a reading in Seattle for my first novel, Time is a Fire, which deals with the Anti-Sikh riots of 1984. And in that bookstore, you know, the novel was kept on, was standing, you know, up, and there were like 4 Sikhs standing in front of that particular novel. And they were saying that, and one of them said, he picked up the novel, he scrutinized it, he looked at it, and then he said, this novel is about the Anti-Sikh riots, but it's been written by a Hindu. And I was immediately struck, even without reading a page or what I had written. It seemed that a judgment had been passed on that particular novel. Which is why, when this event crystallized, I started thinking and going back to that event and started thinking about the who. The who the writer is becomes just as important as what he or she writes. And then again, going back into myself and thinking about who I am to write what I have written so much about. So first I'll read a little bit from this essay, which I wrote in 2012. I promise that's as far back as I'll go tonight. Not really go into the ancient stuff. You see, when you've been around for a while, that's what people ask you, what new have you done? So I won't go back further. This kind of addressed this, and this was originally published in the magazine Frontline. I'll just read a little bit. Why do you write so much on Indira Gandhi's assassination and the anti-Sikh riots it spawned? I'm often asked. Sometimes the question comes with the admonishment, what can such writing possibly do except open old wounds? After all, 28 years have passed. Punjab is peaceful, and moreover, the country has a Sikh Prime Minister. Dr. Manmohan Singh was Prime Minister then. So why don't you simply move on like everyone else and let all that be? At other times, the question comes accompanied by a genuine concern for my literary well-being. There's nothing to gain by writing about the events of '84, I'm told. No one remembers them outside India, so the chances of finding a foreign publisher are remote. Even in India, 1984 accounts for little more than a historical footnote. Certainly, it is nowhere near as prominent as the destruction of the Babri Masjid or the 26/11 attack in Mumbai. So why write about it? Over the years, I have put the same question to myself. I'm not a Sikh. No one I knew was ever targeted in those riots. The mob came nowhere near my home in South Delhi. All I saw of the actual devastation was a burnt vehicle that had not been removed from the road and a raised gurdwara awaiting Kar Seva. That too after the riots abated. My abiding memory of the day of the assassination, that is Indira Gandhi's assassination, is a flag I saw flying at half-mast in a foreign consulate. At that time, I did not know what could possibly make a flag fly at half-mast in a foreign consulate. Yet I distinctly remember my chest tightening with the thought that something was not right. My abiding memory of those 3 days of writing that followed is a TV screen showing dignitaries shuffling past the Prime Minister's body lying in state, the propriety manifest in the scene, contrasting sharply with the mayhem playing out elsewhere. The most telling anecdote I have from those days that involved someone I knew occurred more than a month after the riots subsided. A school friend who happened to be a Sikh visited me at home. After he had left, our chowkidar, an ex-army havaldar from Haryana, told me, "These days you should keep your distance from Sikhs, Baba. They are no longer good people." Those words brought home the extent to which the world can change in a few days. I had known that friend for years. We sat next to each other in school. Now a wall that we had no role in constructing threatened to come between us. Yet despite not being touched by it, it is in that madness that I have found a groundswell of creative inspiration. Writers do not select their material selects them. Thus goes the old adage. As the Israeli writer Edgar Correct reminds us, stories that matter are those that come from somewhere inside the writer. Anyone can pluck something out of thin air. But for something to have value, it has to come from something. On the basis of that, I can only conclude that even though my involvement was no more than that of a bystander, somehow those events have become as much a part of me as my DNA. Which is where this story came from. It's just those two faces emerged one morning, and the entire story that I'm going to read just flowed from there. Accidental Lives was written in 2013, and it was published early 2013. It was published later that year in the British literary magazine Wasafiri. This is where I'm reading. Accidental Lives. Part 1. For 25 years, Priya remained 16 for me, preserved exactly as she was on the day we met. In the year after she left my life, I only had to close my eyes and she'd be there standing in front of me. 25 years later, though, I found her in bits and pieces. In no particular order, I would encounter the dark mole on her cheek, the silver stud in her ear, the gentle slope of her forehead, the rising bridge of her thin nose. As my memory expanded, I would see her in various poses as if I were looking at a profile featured in a magazine. The contemplative Priya gazing into the distance with her chin held between her forefinger and thumb. The attentive Priya leaning forwards in her chair with her eyes glued to the blackboard and a fountain pen poised above her notebook. As I continued to look, the still pictures would come to life and she'd start to laugh and talk. And I'd watch her wondering how much I was seeing actually happened and how much my imagination was standing in for gaps in memory. I met her for the first time in 1984. I had received a scholarship to a posh school in Delhi, or more accurately, a ticket out of back of beyond Gaya. When I got the scholarship letter, I acted like I had won a gold medal at the Olympics. Ignoring my mother's stricken face, I ran about the house as if I were doing a victory lap with the letter held high above my head like a banner. My obvious joy was enough to neutralize the pain my parents felt about sending their only son away from home. They found a distant cousin in Delhi and persuaded him to act as my guardian. I was on my way before the new term commenced in July. Half the neighborhood turned out to see me off at the school, at the station. I was heaped with garlands and women queued up to do aarti. I stood with hands folded as the steel plates circled my face and fingers marked my forehead with vermilion paste. By the time the train was ready to pull out, everyone was crying. I too got caught up in the hysteria. An hour into the journey, all the tears happened and the whole excitement of going to Delhi once again consumed me. 2 weeks later in the classroom, however, the excitement quickly gave way to panic. One look at the fancy boys and girls scattered all over the room, and I wanted to disappear down a hole. My cousin had insisted I visit a temple to seek divine blessing before my first day of school. There, an over-enthusiastic pundit smeared vermilion paste all over my forehead. Since it was the first day, my cousin accompanied me all the way to school, which gave me no little opportunity to wash the stuff off. Add the oily hair, the steel glasses, and the gangly arms and legs. Not only did I look like a hick, but one who also doubled as a geek. If the way I looked was a noose round my neck, then my English pressed down on my mouth like a gag. I was good enough for Gaya, but here I was rubbing shoulders with boys and girls who were conversing as if they were born to it. I was petrified of opening my mouth, where 5 became pipe and should, suit. Through the open door, I could see my cousin standing outside the classroom. Running was out of the question. I spied 2 empty desks at the back and sneaked over to sit at one of them, leaning forward so low that I was hidden by the student in front. I dearly wished no one would sit next to me. I was starting to think that might actually happen when a slim girl with skin the color of old ivory blew in through the door. Her large almond eyes panned all over the room. Spotting the empty desk beside me, she strode over and dropped her backpack on the floor. I swallowed. "Hi," she said. Her smile seemed to rise from deep within her to spread all over her face, reaching deep into her eyes. Its warmth was affecting. For a moment, I forgot how I felt and said hi like it was the most natural thing in the world. If she hadn't told me, I would never have guessed that she was a Sikh. While I didn't know any Sikhs, there were hardly any in Gaya. I knew their religion forbade them from cutting their hair. She had short hair that tapered in a V above the nape of her neck. That she could flout a religious tenet with such impunity filled me with wonder. In my world, religion was sacrosanct. I was even more taken aback when I learned she had a Hindu boyfriend. I came from an India where marriages were arranged and boyfriends and girlfriends were out of the question, leave alone one from another faith. People died in honor killings merely by marrying outside their caste. Why did she choose me for a friend? To this day I debate that. In the 2 years I spent at that school, I didn't share more than a casual conversation with any of my other classmates. But Priya warmed to me the very first day. I guess I must have intrigued her. Certainly I was different from anyone else she had known. Where the others were content to ignore or look down on me, she was curious. Soon after we met, she introduced me to Deepak. Although in the same school, he was a year older than us. He was built like a fast bowler in cricket, all loose limbs and heavy shoulders, and ruggedly handsome with thick curly hair. The two of them had been together since play school and resembled an old married couple in how well they gelled together. I was amazed at the way they would preempt each other's questions and complete each other's sentences. My parents didn't share that kind of chemistry after 20 years of marriage. Because of Priya, Deepak was happy to have me along. That autumn of '84, we went everywhere together. Priya would sit between the two of us in the cinema and reach for our hands during the scary bits. In cramped fast food restaurants, she'd let us fight for a free table and stride to the front of the queue to charm the manager into serving her first. On Saturday nights, the two of them would drag me to Ghungroo, the new discotheque at the Moria Sheraton. While they danced, I would stand about, clapping my hands and doing my best to impersonate a rhythm. Sometimes hope would surge inside me as a hand clasped mine in the cinema, or our eyes met after a funny face or a clever advertising hoarding hit us at the same time. But then she'd turn to Deepak, and I'd be reminded of their perfection and realize I didn't stand a chance. Part 2. We were halfway through school that day when we heard the news. Prime Minister Indira Gandhi had been shot by 2 Sikh bodyguards. The teacher's voice trembled while reading the circular from the principal's office. The principal had decided to close the school. Buses were being summoned to ferry students home. We didn't know what to make of the news. We had a hazy idea of Sikh secessionists operating in Punjab, but they were so far away from our lives, they may very well have been in Timbuktu. Some students were actually pleased the school was closing early. Unlike Deepak and Priya, I used local buses to commute. They were far cheaper than the school bus. That day too, I took one of them. On the way, we passed a Sikh being manhandled on the street. A fleshy-faced man in the seat in front of me shouted encouragement to the goons ripping off the Sikh's turban, and several passengers cheered as the Sikh doubled over after receiving a blow. A policeman who was standing barely 20 yards away steadfastly looked in the other direction. I thought of Priya and knots tightened in my stomach. By the evening, the Prime Minister had been pronounced dead, and armed goons were roaming the streets looking to teach the Sikhs a lesson. I was in a state about Priya. I wanted to call her, but my cousin didn't have a phone. No one in our neighborhood did. Back then, phones were the preserve of the upper classes, and the nearest payphone was more than a mile away. I huddled in front of the radio and TV, trying to learn what I could. As far as they were concerned, the only news worth reporting was a nation mourning its beloved leader. The TV broadcast images of Mrs. Gandhi's body lying in state, with a host of dignitaries filing past, and radio stations played funereal music interrupted by tributes for Mrs. Gandhi. In the end, I switched over to shortwave and the BBC. My unease multiplied as successive reports documented the growing lawlessness and the rising death toll. It was 3 days before the government woke up to the riots and curfew was imposed in Delhi. 2 days later, the city was declared safe enough for the curfew to be lifted in the daylight hours. I rushed to a payphone to call Priya. There was no answer. Finally, I tried Deepak's house, where his father's gruff voice informed me that he wasn't home. Before I could say anything, he hung up. I was taken aback. The abrupt manner in which he had cut me off was at odds with the gracious man I knew. I tried Priya again. There was no answer. Deepak might have slipped out of his house for a while, but I couldn't imagine anyone in Priya's house going out so soon after the riots. I decided to call back in an hour. When I did, the same sequence of events repeated itself. Even during the riots, I had been able to sleep for a few hours. But that night, I lay awake. When the morning finally arrived, I left home as fast as I could to catch a bus to Priya's house on the other side of town. The bus journey did little to calm my nerves as a tableau of vandalized buildings and Sikh temples razed to the ground rolled past my window. The bus seemed to take an eternity to reach her house. I jumped off at my stop and ran the last 100 yards or so to her front gate. It was locked. A security guard informed me the entire family had left town. He couldn't tell me where they had gone. Thinking Deepak would know something, I made my way to his home, which was 6 miles away. There I learned that he had been missing for 4 days. Priya had called him on the second night of the riots to tell him about a mob that had collected outside her home. Men armed with machetes, hockey sticks and bicycle chains who were shouting death to all Sikhs. She was in tears, her voice wavering. The phone connection snapped while she was talking. Later it came out that someone in the mob had cut the telephone wires. Unable to get her on the phone, Deepak decided to go to her. His parents would have none of it. When he remained adamant, they locked him in his room. An hour later, his father unlocked the door to find the room empty and the bathroom window open. But Deepak never arrived at Priya's house, where her father, an ex-paratrooper, saved the day by firing shots in the air that scared away the mob. Plenty of people were burnt alive in those riots, which made their bodies impossible to identify. He may very well have been one of them. It was 3 months before his family gave up on him and held a prayer meeting in his memory. I attended, thinking Priya would be there. She wasn't. I waited in vain for a word from her. No one could tell me where she was. Somewhere in Punjab was the general consensus. Her family owned a farmhouse outside Chandigarh, and it was a Sikh majority state. A classmate mentioned seeing a for sale sign up in her front garden. The sign came down a week later to be replaced by one was sold. The school term ended in December. A new student took her desk after Christmas. She faded from conversation not long after. Those riots turned everything about the way I saw life on its head. Until then, I believed only the Sikh could not control their destiny. As I became a journalist and saw countless lives blown off course by floods, wars, and earthquakes, the whole idea of humans controlling their lives appeared such poppycock. So much of life is accidental. You are lucky if your grand design survives your accidents. For years I debated what made Deepak do what he did that night. He must have known it was futile. With hoodlums attacking anyone unlucky enough to be on the streets, he had little chance of getting anywhere near Priya's house. Even if he did, the mob would have done what it wanted by the time he got there. It was only when I held my daughter for the first time and realized it is possible to love people more than life itself that I felt I understood him. If my daughter were ever in danger, I would have to do something, however futile. I couldn't live with myself otherwise. For the first time, I didn't grudge him Priya's love. I knew I couldn't have done what he did. Part 3. That morning I woke up to a voice. It was so low that I wasn't sure whether it was in my ears or in my head. I thought it was a remnant of some forgotten dream. But it refused to die even after my eyes were wide open. It was hoarse, as if it had been calling for a while. It didn't sound like any voice I knew. It had seemed to know me well, repeating my name in the intimate manner of a close friend. I had slept in that morning. I was up late the night before, helping put the final touches to a news magazine I edited. My wife Reshma and 12-year-old daughter Kusum were ready to leave. Reshma, an economics professor, was dropping Kusum off at her school on her way to the university. I forgot all about the voice while saying goodbye to them, but it returned after they were gone. With a shudder, I realized it now had a face, Priya's face. But it wasn't the Priya I knew. That this Priya had weary middle age etched all over. The skin was stretched, with little lines scattered everywhere, and eyes hemmed in by dark shadows. I sank into a chair. This wasn't my memory serving her up. She was calling out to me after 25 years. When I reached my office that afternoon, my secretary informed me that a Colonel Sani had phoned from Chandigarh. Instinctively, I knew it had to do with Priya. I rang him back. A girl who didn't sound much older than my daughter answered. She asked me to hold and called out for her father. The colonel came on. He spoke in a deep baritone, and I pictured him as the kind of man who was most at home in the parade ground, moving orders at his men. Are you the Abhishek Kumar who was in school with my wife Priya Sekhon? He asked. Yes. There was a short pause. Then he said, she wants to see you. Why now after 25 years? I'd been wondering all morning. What is this about? I asked. He took a deep breath. She has breast cancer, he said. The doctor said it is only a matter of time. He had tracked me down through the school's alumni association. There were 3 Abhishek Kumars in my graduating class. He had phoned each one. I said I'd be happy to come to Chandigarh. He told me he'd have an army car sent over the next morning. He decided on a time. I explained everything to Reshma and believed her. Although she agreed I had to go, I sensed the question lurking in her voice. Was Priya just an old friend? For the moment she was willing to wait before asking. For once I was glad we were an old married couple. If we had been newlyweds, the questions would have flown thick and fast. The sky appeared contemplative as I left for Chandigarh in the morning. It was dark and still, with the occasional puff of breeze, reminiscent of the sigh that escapes you as you reflect on something gone wrong. I sat in the back of the car and stared fixedly out the window. While covering the Sikh militancy in the 90s, I had driven down that road several times, ready to duck in the event of a salvo of bullets flying out of the wheat fields streaming to my right and left. The militancy had fizzled out since then, and the urban sprawl had chewed up big chunks of the countryside. That day the city didn't seem to end, as one unsightly building followed another. It was past 2 before we entered Chandigarh. Built in the 50s, Chandigarh is as modern as an Indian city is going to get. It exists in sectors, with each sector having its own park, school and market. The colonel's house was in Sector 7. Priya had opted to come home once the doctors indicated they couldn't do anything except delay her death. The house was a 3-bedroom brownstone with a garden at the front and back. A girl in her mid-teens met me at the front door. She gave me a strange look before disappearing. I guessed she was Priya's daughter. Presently the colonel appeared. I had expected him to be a big man, but he was no more than 5'9" and slightly built. He had a pointed beard and wore a red turban. He didn't waste time on pleasantries, not even bothering to shake hands. Asking me to follow him, he led me to a large bedroom with a king-size bed. A dark woman dressed in a yellow sari was seated in a cane chair next to the bed. I assumed she was the nurse-cum-attendant. The colonel told her to wait outside. Then he left me alone with Priya. I settled in the chair the woman had vacated. The room was bright with pink walls. In an obvious attempt to soften the brightness, the curtains were drawn, and only one of the 3 globes of light, the furthest from the patient, was switched on. Several bouquets of flowers rested on a long table standing against the wall in front of me, and kettle cards jostled for space on the table beside the bed. She had a lot of love in her life. I was glad for that. She lay on her back, the size of the bed making her look even more shrunken. A blue patient's gown enclosed her frail body, and white ivy tubes protruded from her skeletal arms. Her cheeks appeared as if holes had been drilled in them. None of it was entirely unexpected, but it came as a shock after the words carried in my head for 25 years. Unable to speak, I stared at her. She finally ended the silence. I had no idea the Abhishek Kumar I was reading in output was you, she said. A smile broke through the same lines on her face. I guess 5 is no longer 5. I smiled in spite of myself. Thanks for coming, she said. After the way I disappeared, I would have understood if you had not. There was a short pause as she stared straight ahead. It was Daddy who decided Delhi wasn't safe for us, she said finally. I didn't want to leave. Deepak was in Delhi. All my friends were there. But Daddy won't listen. We had survived by the skin of our teeth. Next time, we may not be so lucky. No sooner were the riots over than he sent me and my mother to a farmhouse in Chandigarh. Then he sold off everything he owned in Delhi as fast as he could. She paused, short of breath. I started to rise. She held up a hand. A little later, her breathing returned to normal. I called Deepak the moment we reached the farmhouse, she said, speaking slowly. I hadn't talked to him in days. Our phone in Delhi didn't work after we were cut off. His mother told me what had happened. She accused me of killing him. I was shattered. For days I simply sat in my room and cried. He'd still be alive if I hadn't called. I knew he couldn't do anything. Still I called. Her voice wavered towards the end and then died. I could feel only the deepest sympathy for her. The moment she had mentioned Deepak's name, it seemed he was there in the room with us. That was how much she loved him. And she had spent her entire life blaming herself for his death. She did nothing wrong at all. We were scared and reached for someone we loved. That's only natural. As for him, he did what he did. Someone you love. That's only as for him, he did what he did because he couldn't do otherwise. You are nowhere to blame. She was quiet. I thought I saw her face soften. That was the best I could do. We spoke a little longer. She asked me about my family. Beyond that, I don't remember. When I saw she was tiring, I rose to say goodbye. She tried to smile, but the effort proved too much. Knowing I'd never see her again, I lingered at the door to make one last move. Thank you.
Could I now ask Professor Cheran to read his thoughts?
Could he? Thank you very much for the opportunity. Thank you, Vidya. Thank you, Dr. Sharma, and thank you, Sasankar. I'm going to start by reading the poem that I wrote in 1998 about children. I wrote this poem about children way before the child rights and children in conflict zones, and before the United Nations has set up all these special rapporteurs on children in armed conflict. That was the reality at the time for me, looking around. And I also would like to say that I do not write poetry in English. English is my academic language, and Tamil is my creative language. So I write poetry in Tamil, and there are a couple of writers and poets and academics that have translated my work from Tamil to English. I would like to thank them for doing the translation. Even though I do not translate my poetry, I very closely work with them in translating these poems. So I would like to thank my translators of my poetry. And my first poem is Children. Who creates children? I asked. Rustling in through the open window, wind said, not I. I only give strong nerves of music to their voices. I give deep colors to their eyes, said light. I touch their tender feet with a smile, said the red oleander. I weave the walls of their hearts with love thread, said sea. I add magic strength to their laughter, said forest. If that is true, who put guns in their hands, army boots on their feet, grenades at their waist and hatred in their eyes. I asked, wind and sea froze, light withered, shattering away like splinters of glass. In a single flash of lightning, flowers and forest were in flames, and all the birds in a great flock flew into that fire. Children, our children. My poem is, the second one is called Sunset. I wrote this poem in March 2009, just before the end of the war in Sri Lanka. In the last phases of war, you may have heard, more than 60,000 people disappeared. And I have lost about 85 of my family, friends, and relatives. And some of them, they disappeared, we don't even know where they were. So I was in Toronto, Canada, but I've been keeping informed to work at things, midnight telephone calls, early morning calls. This is a series of poems. This is one of the poems in the series that I wrote in the last 8 years. For the sunset. The sun has set. The sun has set across the spreading field. The sun has set. The sun has set in the shadow of the woods. The sun has set beyond the anger of the rain, which is yet to fall upon the hundreds and hundreds of bodies sprawled upon the sand, upon the severed legs, alone upon the seashore. The sun has set upon the broken wings of a quivering small breath. The sun has set, which does not know where to keep its loss and sorrow, and searches for a corner in a small cage where we can lurk. Within my tears the sun has set. The sun has set within my tears. At dawn they arrived with faltering words. The body has not been found. My third poem is called Ask. Ask. Ask snakes how to copulate. Ask the morning how to dawn. Ask trees the meaning of patience. Ask sleepwalkers what color dreams are. Ask refugees how their tears became their prison cells. And ask women and blessed who must walk the streets of this town at night what fear is. And ask lovers who wear no studs, where the last for only 30 days. And ask the monsoon where the fish have all disappeared, the fish which once sang in the still milk ocean beneath the bridge on full moon nights. And ask a lost diaspora what is born out of the loneliness of language. And ask her, who flung a living ember of fire upon the ice cliffs of my life, and ask her about the quintessential loneliness of grief. Ask me when the last train of the evening has gone, and the railway lines shiver and break in the cold, what it is to wait with a single wing and a single flower. The next one is about my Canadian experience. When you are an immigrant in Canada, in North America, in New Zealand, in Australia, if you try to find a job and find something, you are asked to show Canadian experience. And when I was first asked about my Canadian experience, this is my Canadian experience. It's called color. In the street, dry now after a fall of snow, beneath the street lamp with its dim light, the tip of his nose frozen and red, a small Canadian flag pinned carelessly upon his rag drooping overcoat, the centuries of date and stains of beer froth on his long, dense brown beard, now shapeless, buffeted by snow, wind, and rain, with 100 back crooked nails and long, curly, tangled hair, he lies huddled, his blue eyes blinking frequently, part sunken in darkness, part crazed, he begs for money, and thanks those who fling him coins. I refuse. Fuck you, he said, turning his face away. And the next one is one of my favorite ones. It is titled The 21st of May 1986. The 21st of May 1986 was a very, very important day for me. It's a very important day for all of us, but it's a very important day for me for two reasons. The first, the 21st of May 1986 was the day the Sri Lankan Air Force began the bombing of civilian areas in Jaffna. And I had a miraculous escape on that day. So I gave my left leg bombing, but I survived. That was one of the nine events that I survived. So it was in 1986. But the 21st of May is also very important because that was the day Rajiv Gandhi was assassinated by the Tamil Tigers. So that was in 1991, not in 1986. So there's a kind of echo in the poem that kind of foretells you about what sort of violence, and all these kind of things that happen. But these are, for me, not really important. The day the Jaffna was bombed and survived, I survived all kinds of things. That's not really important. And the day, Rajiv Gandhi was assassinated, that was part of the game, right? But but the most important thing on the 21st of May, that was my birthday. And I survived. So this is a poem that I wrote in 1986, about a few hours after the survival. The 21st of May 1986. At midnight, your house is aflame. In front of your eyes, they stab your wife. Air Force planes dip to the earth and rise again. The bombs fall, glinting, catching the sunlight in all directions. Children scream. My grandma continues to grumble about her reading glasses which fell and broke as she rushed for the bunker. The director of the blood bank informs us very kindly there is no blood left. I search for a friend who is looking for another friend and who is looking for another friend, lost in an entirely friendly skirmish. The people discussing whether this is a democratic revolution or a socialist one are demolished by cannon fire. Having survived 2 airstrikes and 20 helicopter gunships, I break my ankle, tangling with a small door, and as I lie in bed, an intellectual friend of mine brings me Zen and the art of motorbicycle maintenance. Man trying to fix the Red Cross sign on the roof of the hospital falls. Picked off by a helicopter gunship. All the same. All the same, crowds are left, and so is paper. Also, the sound of the machine gun, now, as always, remains in here. one is called the Ghost Song. It has an interesting background to it. You know, I have witnessed all kinds of deaths and atrocities by the Sri Lankan government, by various Tamil militant groups, and by the Indian Army. So, and I survived. And that most of my poems are about all these different kinds of experience. You know, that bearing witness in the absence of real contemporary historians documenting, no documentation as such. So, you know, we, instead of writing poetry, we became witness to the events. That is in a sense that, you know, our poetry and poets became witness because no one else was willing to witness and write and record. Right? That shouldn't be our task, but we are forced to do it. Right? So this is the poem I wrote in 1987 during the presence of Indian soldiers in the northern eastern part of Vietnam. So I also survived a couple of times at the hands of the Indian Army. And you will see from the poem what sort of the difficult existence we had at the time. Not much has been written about the atrocities committed by the Indian Army. There were a lot of material in Tamil, but it was not really widely known in India. So this is one snippet of the poet being witnessed. It's called a ghost song. The guns on both sides, me in the middle. An innocent commoner, that is my name. I have no city, I did. Now it is gone, thanks to whole India. Guns on both sides, me in the middle, the burning fire, and me in the middle. He says, sit. The other says, stand. He says, go. And the other says, come. He said, die. Another said, live. He slew the body, and the other killed the soul. And I became the ghost. The next one is it's Yaman. You know Yaman, it's the Lord of Death. It's about Lord of Death. There's also one of my older, you know, the old poems. See how the issues of death, survival, and Yaman, you know, keep on coming back, right, as witness. The wind passes as fear fills the night. I gaze at the stillness between the stars, the whose shadow lurks by the door. I wouldn't know, nor would they. It happened swiftly, death. No reason, no justice, values and virtues freeze where they stand in the oppressive silence. In the dark, lost in flight, pigeons pound and pound and pound again against the door. My resolve to endure slips. Do the butterflies disdaining light shed their colors in the time of youth? As sunflowers, their golden petals untouched by dust, lotus flowers that bloom at the touch of water, as stars they will be born again. Until then, at the edge of the lake, stare at the waves. And I'm going to read two more. And this is called the story of a severed leg. So this is a poem I wrote in 2004 there was a ceasefire, and then the Sri Lankan government was the Tamil Tigers were observing the ceasefire. And after 14 years, I had a chance to go back to the city I was born and the village I was born. So I'm going from the capital Colombo to all the way to Japan. So this is what exactly I witnessed on the way. It's a long way. At that time there were no roads. You know, it used to be a decent commute between those two cities. And I could not visit the village I was born for a very long time. And then on the way, so this is exactly what happened, you see. The story of a severed leg. I am writing the story of a severed leg. The road that begins in the mountains runs through this barren land to the city. Now lies destroyed. The story of war mixed with blood in scattered fragments, like a restless ghost, follow the road in grief. The tears of wounded trees settle on the marks left by vehicles of well-meaning endures. The dust covers the tears, indifferent, like an undertaker covering the body of an unclaimed corpse. Dismembered by war, the road survives. I saw where the road was, a half-broken milestone. I saw where the road froze, a half-broken milestone. On it sat a skull. On this barren road, consumed with thirst, turning toward the forest, I saw beneath the parley tree a severed leg. 1,000 stories rose to fill the forest from that leg, lying without protest. The story displays the wondrous tales and visions the forest actuated bred long before memory's time. The display stories and beliefs in the diasporic lands, in the temples of Tamils, in the myriad lives now hang embodiment of sin. Beneath those compassion in darkened rooms, the irresponsibility of distance, I see in these walking corpses. I saw in the forest engulfing pain, courage, sorrow, oppression, despair, the severed leg. And I saw on the tomb of my dreams, scattering in stories, in silence, the severed leg. And I'm going to read one more poem in English, and then I would like to conclude by reciting one of my poems in Tamil. Right? Otherwise, it won't make a sense. Right? I'm reading in a borrowed language. I want you to hear that at least the words, my own words, my original words in Tamil. Right? So this is This poem is titled "About a Bear." So I wrote this about and for my 4-year-old twins, right, a boy and a girl. So after they were born, and when I started interacting with them, there were I wrote a series of poems, because out of baby's mouth, comes a lot of wisdom. Right. I borrowed some of their wisdom. And this is one such wisdom, right, about a bear. I told my son the tale of a bear that arrived one morning, an uninvited guest, to drink tea with us. A big fellow with black spots mixed into a white coat. He walked up, friendly, affable, surrounded by flowers of gentleness. His strides scarcely dislodged even the breeze. Sparrows and ring-necked doves took one look and burst into laughter. Honeybees went into exile at the sight of the bear. Well, do I get any tea? Asked the bear. What a question. Just what we are waiting for, my son told him. Scorching hot tea, wasn't it? We had to drink it slowly, slowly, and slowly. What a miracle, water becoming tea. The bear laughed. The gale arose from that laughter, cooling our tea. In one gulp, the bear finished his tea and said with a sigh, all that is left in my cup, all that is left in my cup is emptiness. What shall we do with it? What shall we do with it? Leaving the question to scrap between us like a stone, the bear retreated into its forest. I asked my 3-year-old son, what shall we do with the emptiness? Leave it under a rock, Appa, the boy said. So I'm going to recite, a poem in Tamil. Should I read the English version first so that you can understand the Tamil, or you don't really need any English, just listen to the whole thing. So I read it in Tamil, and I'll tell you the context, and I read it in Tamil, right? I study in Tamil. So this was one of the many programs against Tamils in Sri Lanka. So I wrote this poem in 1983, and it's about the major artery road called Gold Road. In 1983, somebody was running, was chasing him. He was about to be killed, but he was running. This is the whole thing. I very quickly read the English one so that you will see the heartbeat of it, right? So the title of the poem is I could forget all this. I could forget all this. I could forget all this. Forget the flight headlong to Gold Road, clutching an instant spark of hope, refusing to abandon this wretched, vulnerable life, even though the very earth shuddered, and so to my heart. Forget the sight of a thigh bone protruding from an upturned, burnt-out car, a single eye fixed in a staring somewhere between the earth and the sky, empty of its eye, a socket caked in blood. On Dickman's Road, a 6-man dead, head split open, black hair turned red, a fragment of a sari that escaped burning, bereft of its partner, a lone left hand, the wristwatch wrenched off, a single woman pregnant, bearing unbearably, a cradle from a burning house. I could forget all this, I could forget all this, forget all, forget everything, I could forget everything, but you, my girl, snatched up and flung away one late afternoon, as you waited in secret, while the handful of rice found after so many days cooked in its pot, your children hidden beneath the tea bushes, low-lying clouds shielding them about. How shall I forget the broken shards and the scattered rice lying parched upon the earth? Right. So that was a good translation, actually. I really liked it when it was read in English. Now in Tamil, right? I could forget all this. எல்லாவற்றையும் மறந்துவிடலாம். இந்த பாலம் உயிரை அனாதரவாக இழப்பதை வெறுத்து ஒரு கண பொறியில் தரித்த நம்பிக்கையோடு காலி வீசி திசைகளோடு இதயமும் குலுங்க விரைந்த போது அவிழ்க்கப்பட்டு எரிந்த காலில் வழியே தெரிந்த இருந்தது. ஆகாயத்துக்கும் பூமிக்கும் இடையில் எங்கோ ஒரு புள்ளி இறுகி போய் கிடந்த வெளியே இல்லாமல் தலையின் குளித்து திளவித்து இருந்த டிக்மன்ஸ் ரோட்டில் தலைக்கருப்புகளுக்கு பிளவில் இரத்த சிவப்பில் கிடந்து கிடந்த 6 மனிதர்கள் தீயில் கேட்க தவறிய ஒரு செயலை துணை வந்து மணிக்கூடும் இல்லாமல் தனித்து போய் கிடந்த ஒரு இடது கையை எரிந்து கொண்டிருக்கும் வீட்டில் இருந்து தொட்டில் ஒன்றை சுமக்க முடியாமல் சுமந்து போன ஒரு சிறுவர் கத்திங்களுக்கு அர்ப்பணிப்பது எல்லாவற்றையுமே மறந்து விடலாம். ஆனால் குழந்தைகளை இறக்கி வைத்து முயல்களும் இறங்கி மறைத்து அந்த நீண்ட நாட்களுக்கு பிறகு கிடைத்த கொஞ்ச அரிசியை பானைகளுக்கு சோறு போம் என்று உறைந்தபடி காத்திருந்த போது பிடிங்கேறிப்பட்டேன். வைந்த பானையில் நிலத்தில் சிலது உலர்ந்த சொற்களை நான் எப்படி மாற்றேன், நான் எப்படி மாற்றேன்.
If you do, then you're free to ask some questions from our two speakers here, and or make observations. Anyone? Moving an experience to really, well, I guess I will conclude this by saying what I felt. A lot of anger, horror, fear, the racism, discrimination, insecurities that come, almost a guilt for being the human beings that we are. And to use Tagore's words, we've really broken this world into narrow domestic walls. And these are the walls we surround ourselves by in terms of keeping our identity, keeping our faith, keeping our language, and whatever else that we want to keep. But these are walls we surround ourselves with, because we are desperately seeking our security. But actually what we are keeping out is communication. It's the human feeling, the love, the harmony, and all the valuable things that make life worth living. I think my last conclusion would be that we forget that there is a strength in being vulnerable, because that is what helps us to reach out and to hold. And if that is one experience that this evening has given us, it is that. I'd like to thank both of you. All of you that who have come here, because I know it is a cold evening and it is nearing 8, so thank you for being here.
I'd like to thank all of you for coming. But I would like to mention that because of teaching university and this celebration, I was waiting for the last moment. Big thanks. This has been a wonderful experience actually. Collaboration with something to university. First time we're coming in a university space like this and doing something together. And I was telling Kanda, from the president and the dean to everyone whom we have interacted with, it's been a very heartwarming experience. And I think if you look here, the guest house where Cheran is stuff, the office staff, everyone has been so cordial and kind, making such an event possible, welcoming that atmosphere, remarkable. So I'd like to thank all of you for making this possible, and I must mention about Vikram and Cheran. Cheran has come all the way. We have an ongoing legacy we need to know about this. And Cheran was supposed to conclude that series, and on the 16th we were having a lecture, but then the 2 days back his flight, there was a problem in Belgium, there was an air employee strike and the flight was cancelled. And it was frantic, because everything was fixed and how to what to do. That's why we had this light conversations about what are we doing. So finally we had to cancel the program. But Cheran, it was very difficult for him to get another flight and actually make it to this program only for this. But he took the trouble and he took the next flight and he had to really go into there was a problem. And it's also LILA is such a small organization in its resources, etc. So all these people are coming to us, spending on their own, reaching out, which is absolutely moving experience for us. So I would like to really, words are not enough to actually thank many of the people who we are interacting with and being part of this whole movement for LILA. And Vikram has actually come, it was because as you said earlier, Vikram is the one who really moved this. He gave this proposition, wrote this thing which I read, and it's because of him that this will be possible. And we plan for such events, such programs, bringing various spheres together so that we can all be that, we can all be together, irrespective of where we're coming from, which is very, very important. Whatever we do in terms of achievements, status, etc., it's the most important thing is that vulnerable spot which connects us. Thank you very much for this evening. Thank you.